Hello and welcome to this Thursday's interview with me, Anne Diamond, here on Viking.TV. Today I'm meeting a woman who fulfilled her lifelong ambition and has done it in a very big deal way. Ever since she was a small child, she wanted to be a doctor, like her father and her grandfather, and she has since risen to the heady rank of Vice Admiral in the US Navy. And that means that she's actually risen to the highest military rank within the medical corps than any other woman has ever achieved. Like so many brilliant and brave doctors and health workers, she's given more than 100% in the last year. She was appointed to lead Washington State's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. She was responsible for managing the number of critical care beds across the state and working to encourage compliance with COVID rules and restrictions. And that has also made her a really valuable asset and friend to Viking, because her expertise and experience has helped get them sailing again. I'm delighted to welcome 3-star Admiral and now Viking's Chief Health Officer, Dr. Raquel Bono. That still makes her titter. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne.
So you could barely believe that that's what you are nowadays.
It's a mouthful. It's a lot.
It is, but it says a lot too, really, doesn't it? Tell us the story of your childhood ambition, because there's this lovely story. I know you've told lots of other people in a way to try and sort of lift their spirits and tell them that anything can be achieved, about what your father said to you about becoming a doctor.
You know, it's something that is very much a part of me. It's defined me through all this time. But my father, who was also a surgeon, would spend many nights working late. And because I was the eldest child, my mother would let me wait up for him and have dinner with him, which was always a big treat. And one night he came home and I mentioned to him that, Daddy, one day I want to be able to work in the hospital so I can see you every day and, you know, we can work together. And I started listing the jobs that I thought I could have, and he interrupted me. He says, well, why don't you want to become a doctor? And I said, well, I didn't know girls could be doctors. And he said, you can be anything. You can be anything. And, you know, that resonated with me from that moment and onward. And really the other part of that story, though, Anne, is that years later when I became a mother and I was telling my oldest daughter what I did, and I was explaining what it was like to be a doctor, what it was like to take care of people, what it was like to be in the Navy and to serve our country. She was listening very carefully to me, and she stopped me and she said, Mama, can boys be doctors too? And I realized that things had come full circle. But that, yes, but what my father had instilled in me from the very start about being anything was something that I went ahead and embodied and pursued.
I mean, it is an amazing story. We've got this gorgeous picture of you, your father, who's a doctor, and your brother, who's also in the Navy, yeah?
Yes.
I mean, and then you are in the middle, a family of pretty high achievers. But then that does go back in your family, because as you said, your grandfather was a doctor.
Yes.
And, I can understand where that sort of inheritance feeling almost came from. But your father's family, well, and your mother's family had a very, very rough childhood themselves, because of course in the middle of everything in the Philippines in World War II.
Exactly. And actually it was during that time, during the Second World War, that my father developed that concept of service and what that meant. His father, my grandfather, actually rose to the rank of colonel in the U.S. Army and served with the U.S. military in the Philippines during the occupation. And what my grandfather instilled in my father and what my father instilled in my brother and myself and our siblings, and hence, you know, and his grandchildren, is the importance of service, of being able to give to a mission that's much larger than yourself. And if it's in service to your country, that's even better.
And giving 100% and never losing your sense of integrity.
Exactly. You know, the mission itself is so important, and there are very few people who are actually entrusted to be able to do that. But if you are one of the chosen to be able to do that, then it's imperative that you're doing it completely, 100%.
I mean, while your grandfather was away because he was captured and tortured,
Yes,
I think, at one point
yes,
by the enemy, your father, who was probably not much more than a child at the time, was expected to take on the role of, you know, looking after
yeah.
the.
It's exactly right. He became the head of the household at a very young age. I think he was really in his early teens, if not just 10 years old himself. But it was upon him to be able to help make sure that the family stayed together, that all the needs were being taken care of. And as the eldest in my own family, that was part of what he had also instilled in me, is the importance of setting that example for the family, of leading the way, and being able to make sure that all the needs in the family were being addressed.
But the more you tell the story, the more you start to see where these sets of values come from. But
Yeah.
his mother, so your paternal grandmother, apparently
Yes,
made a very courageous stand against the Japanese military, who were
yes,
your grandfather.
yes. I mean, she actually went to them and stood her ground and made the petition to release my grandfather. And she was very firm on this was somebody who was a doctor, who was a military officer, who had a very large family. My father's the oldest of 9 children, had a very large family, and she really stood her ground. And I think one of the best compliments that my father has paid me, among many, I mean, my father is just always so encouraging, is that he oftentimes tells me that some of my determinedness and the determination reminds him of his own mother.
Yeah, it's in the genes, isn't it, I guess? Where were you brought up? Not in the Philippines.
I was born in the Philippines, but when I was 6 months old, I was taken to the United States, where my father was doing his surgical residency at the University of Minnesota. So I spent 7 years in the United States, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then my father returned to the Philippines, and that's when I was about 7 years old. So I have a recollection of that. And we stayed there in the Philippines until I was in about fourth grade. So that would be about 10 or 11 years old. And then we moved to Canada, where my father did a fellowship in transplant surgery. And then from there, we went to the United
Wow,
States.
my
Yes.
goodness. Like I said, a family of high achievers. Once your father had said this, you know, you can be anything you want, and you really started to believe that and then want it, did you also know that you wanted to serve, you wanted to go into the Navy?
No, that was a really interesting transition. I mean, I grew up knowing that I could be anything. And as a matter of fact, when my father had kind of planted that idea that I could be anything, I naturally gravitated to being a doctor and looking at being a surgeon. But I also realized he had really opened my aperture, and I started considering a lot of other things as I was growing up. I mean, why couldn't I be an astronaut? Why couldn't I do a lot of other things? And so it was when I got into college, into university, that I started thinking, well, yes, I could become a doctor, but are there other things that I should be considering? And I went through all the usual courses in university, and I would enjoy them, but I would always gravitate back to the life sciences. And so when I decided that I was definitely going to become a doctor, I was going to go to medical school, there came an opportunity that I could I could receive a scholarship to go to medical school with the military. And this was what gave me my introduction into the military. But the reason I chose the scholarship was I'd reached the point in my young adulthood where I thought, I want to do this on my own. And I want to be able to show that I can do this on my own. Even though my parents had already told me they would be more than happy to support me in my medical school endeavor, I wanted to do this on my own. So I accepted a scholarship, and I had payback time associated with that scholarship. And every time I got to the completion of my obligated service, I realized I was having such a great time that I wanted to stay on a little bit longer.
When did you train? Because you actually did. I mean, it's almost as though you're not just going to be any old doctor. You are going to do our best. You're going to do really difficult forms of doctoring, of medicine,
Yeah.
like trauma surgery, for
Yes.
instance. And you're trained in trauma medicine, particularly. That
Yes.
must be incredibly difficult. But when you come to think of your career now, it sort of was preparing you all the way, wasn't it?
Absolutely. You know, I was drawn to trauma surgery for a variety of reasons, but one of the things that I really enjoyed about being able to be a surgeon to begin with was really helping people and really helping people get better. And part of the domain of trauma surgery itself is being able to take care of people who are, you know, nearly mortally or close, you know, mortally injured or in grave injury, and being able to help them. And then there's a critical care aspect that also attracted me and was something that I felt very compelled and driven to do that. But a large part of what I learned in becoming a trauma surgeon was the idea of managing crisis, and how do you maintain that calm through a crisis so that you can see clearly to the other end. And that had a lot of parallels, not only in trauma surgery, but as you probably know, I was also deployed to the first Gulf War.
Yeah.
And being able to maintain that sense of awareness and where you're going and where you need to go is something that has served me well in the military, in trauma surgery, and now with the COVID.
How much of that is instinctive, the ability to manage a crisis, and how much is training? Because we all, don't we, in life? Some people are really good in a crisis. They seem to be able to cope and manage it, and others just go bananas.
Yeah. You know, that's a great question. There is so much of it that is learned. It's a learned behavior. And, but it's important. I mean, we all go through it when we're first met with something we don't know. It's, you know, it's the fight or flight response. If there's something unfamiliar, of course, that's, you know, that's natural. But as I told my daughters when they were growing up, because I wanted them not to be squeamish about anything. And so we would oftentimes be out there playing with bugs or garden snakes or worms, you know, and trying to make this very normal so we wouldn't get squeamish. But one of the things I told my daughters is that it's really hard to think when you're screaming. So when you're in a situation where you need to think, you can't be screaming at the same time. So it's just a good idea to take a deep breath and not scream, and then start using your brain. And the more you practice that, you know, the more naturally it comes. Now, as a trauma surgeon, I got a lot of practice being able to do that.
Doesn't it make you mad when you watch something like a disaster movie on TV and the women are always screaming?
I think it's a poor representation of anybody when they're screaming. You know, I think, how can you think? I mean, that's my actual response is, how can you think if you're screaming?
I get so mad about it, but that's very interesting. You can't think straight if you're screaming. Absolutely.
Try it. Yeah.
Yeah, you really can't. We've got lots of lovely pictures of your work.
Oh.
I'm not even sure if the pictures I'm going to show now are you know, are going in any sort of chronological order. But my goodness, not only do you look amazing in your uniform, you seem to be having a terrific time. What on earth is happening there?
Oh, it is. And I have to tell you, I just loved being in the military. For as daunting as it was at times, and as challenging, and as for many, you know, because I was I was kind of a unicorn. Nobody expected someone like me to show up and be a 3-star admiral. And so I think just being in an environment where 90% of the time when I'd walk into a room, I was a surprise, that was something that brought a smile to my face.
Yeah,
but what really moved me were the people I got to work with and the patients I got to take care of. I mean, it was just incredible. There's no finer feeling than feeling like you're making a difference to the people who are depending on you. So I just had a great time.
Yeah, but you love communicating it as well, don't you?
Yeah,
You don't just love your work for you and what it does for you. You love to be able to transmit that to others, because when you speak, you there's a magic in your eyes that people seem to love.
Well, you know, I think that yes, there's certainly the gratification that I experience, but watching how it makes a difference in other people's, you know, experience and their lives, and that's really what moves me. It's because it's being able to make that difference, and there's just so many rewards. It's you know, it's a great feeling.
And as I was saying in the introduction, that you are the first woman to receive such a high rank in the medical corps in the US Navy.
Yeah.
But not only that, you have a brother who's a serving officer in the Navy at the same time. That makes you pretty unique, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. He and I were the only brother-sister who served as admirals at the same time.
Wow.
So yeah, and it's just, you know, I'm so fortunate. Okay, so in addition to my father, who always believed, and I'm so blessed that I have both of my parents. In addition to having a father and my mother who completely were behind me 100%, I also happened to have a brother who believed in me, you know, in that I could do it, that I deserved it, and has always been one of my biggest fans. I mean, how lucky can I be?
No, that's absolutely amazing. So serving on, you mentioned there that you'd served in the Gulf War. Obviously, you were Operation Desert Shield, Operation Desert Storm,
Yes.
which meant that you had to set up and organize a hospital in the desert, basically.
Right, yes. You know, and talk about a new environment and being and having to adapt to something. We actually had to build the hospital ourselves. And I had gone through training to know how to do this, and so I knew what the drill was. I think what we were all surprised at was when we first got in country, how incredibly hot it was, and just being in a desert area. And then the other part that really got my attention, and it was something that we ended up having to adjust to in some way, was how there were so many other troops from other countries that were in there too, and what that meant coordinating such a large effort like that.
And I know that having spoken to doctors who served in the British hospitals in the Gulf and since, they're very, very proud of their success rate, that if a casualty can be gotten back to hospital
Yes.
As fast as possible, and that is only something that they can do, once they get into your hands, you can usually save them. Isn't that the fact?
Absolutely. Yes, it's you know, we had this incredible success rate. If we could get patients, if we could get injured service members back to us within an hour, we had like a 95% survival rate, 95 plus. It was just incredible. What we did in the, you know, in very austere environments with limited resources are things that we're still studying today to continue to make sure that we're gleaning the right lessons so we can apply that in civilian settings. It's incredible. It's an incredible record that still stands.
Well, yes, I understand that you, when you were in charge, brought the combat survival rate up to the highest in the world. Is that right?
Well, it wasn't just me. I had a lot of help. We had designed a system in a lot of our military hospitals so that we could make sure and take all of the people who'd been injured and then continue their resuscitation and their and the surgeries that they needed to continue on with their recovery. So I had a lot of help. It wasn't just me.
It must be one thing to be trained in trauma and to be working in, say, a civilian hospital. And it must be terrible enough, the sights you have to see and hopefully the work that you are able to do. But in a battlefield situation, it must be so relentless. How do you look after you? How do you make sure it doesn't get to you?
You know, thank you for asking that question, because sometimes that really does get lost in there. And we saw this over and over again. And as a matter of fact, if I can bring this to present day, we're seeing similar things happening with the pandemic, and that the caretakers are experiencing a trauma of their own. And that's where it's really important that you have the right kind of leadership at all times to make sure that the people who are working with you also have that space, have that support that they need. And I think the piece that I learned over and over again is that the most important element of this was acknowledging other people's, you know, fear, pain, and it's sometimes despair, and just being able to acknowledge that and treat that and hold that in respect that it's real, and then being able to give them at least a little bit of respite, even if it wasn't enough, but at least some, was such an important thing that I learned over and over again.
But how did you look after you? I mean, was there anything you did? Did you read? Did you have enough time off to read? I don't know, we listen to music. How do you look after yourself in that situation?
So I think one of the things that I learned to do when I was in the desert that I'm still very proud of is that in my younger days, I had been running. I was a long distance runner, and I competed in 10Ks and half marathons. But one of my proudest accomplishments that I did while I was deployed was being able to acclimate to the weather, which the heat was greater than 110 degrees Fahrenheit at times, very hot and also humid. My greatest accomplishment for myself was being able to run at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the hottest part of the day, and be able to do it and recover very quickly. So I was able to run several miles and I had to build up to it, but that was how I took care of me, was setting that goal for myself.
Were you able to get anyone else to join you, or did they just?
Oh yeah. No. It was interesting. Yes, we had a handful of runners that would do this, and if we saw them running at night, we'd go, okay, well, you're not real runners. You need to be running with us in the middle of the day.
Hey, yeah. But people are very competitive sometimes, and if they see one person they want to join in too. So tell us, if you can explain to us non-military people, I mean, what does a 3-star admiral do?
So first off, it is such an incredible honor. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the statistics, but in the Navy, there are about 300,000 sailors. Only 300 of us get to be admirals, and you get to 3-star. When I had risen to 3-star, there were only 5 other female 3-stars. Not in medical, I was the only medical, but I knew them all because there weren't very many of us. So as a 3-star, you're given a tremendous amount of responsibility and accountability. And at this point, and what I really enjoyed about being in the military is learning about what leadership is all about. And so a part of that is being able to take very large organizations and systems in the same direction, creating the environment that you need for everyone to succeed so that we're all pulling in the same direction. And at that stage, I had large sums of money that I had to be accountable for. I had, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that I was responsible for. So as a 3-star, you're given this very large portfolio and entrusted with all of that to help make positive change happen.
And of course, you tell the story, and I'm just going to show a clip here where you tell this lovely story. I think you're speaking at your old university, Texas.
Yes.
And you're telling them that there was another little problem in becoming a 3-star general.
Yes.
Admiral, rather. Let's just watch you tell this story because it's fab. We've got a little bit of this speech now.
Okay.
Now, there's one other story that I want to share with you about my career, and that is about being an admiral. So there's about 300,000 of us in the Navy, and of that 300,000, about 300 of us are admirals. Now, the whole point about being an admiral is that there is a certain amount of responsibility that's imparted to you. There's authority that you're given, and there's an expectation that you will help continue to bring the Navy forward. And in my case, because of my nomination for the job that I currently have, I also work across the services with Army, Air Force, and Navy. The job alone is just thrilling, and just being considered to take that position is an extremely high honor and privilege. And in order to take that position, it meant that I would be promoted to Vice Admiral, which is a 3-star admiral. Well, here's the thing, that when it came time for my promotion, I had to special order the bling that I'm currently wearing because they'd never had a female medical 3-star admiral. But see, you guys can do that. All of you can do this. Absolutely. And that's what I wanted to come back and tell all of you. You can do anything. All of you can do anything. And wherever you go, It is okay to break a few molds. It is okay for you to have to make them special order you something because it's never been done. It is okay to rock the boat. And every now and then you're going to need to. Because, and this is my big finish, what starts here truly does change the world.
When you make that impassioned speech about you can do anything and you can change the world, are you speaking to women more than men?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I have 3 daughters, and of course, my oldest daughter was in the audience crying, and she was listening to this. I am bringing that passion from the perspective of a woman who has had to face many challenges and had to find something from within and be able to have that close-knit family that I do to help me go through this. But I'm speaking to everybody because I realize that there are so many things that get in the way of people's best opportunity, and they don't even realize that they can do this, that they can move past that. In my career, I've mentored both men and women, and I found that while it is so important to be that role model and to be able to help women with their voices and be able to help them find their voice and bring it to the table, it's equally important to be able to mentor men so that they listen a little bit more and that they learn what it looks like to be inclusive. And so it's on both sides. And when I've had that opportunity, I found it equally rewarding.
And certainly people who talk of you talk about how you have done so much in many roles that have been previously very male dominated. So you obviously had your own battles, but I love this because you're not frightened of being very feminine as well. This,
No.
From the same speech that you made at your old college, I think everybody would love to see just this little tiny clip.
Okay.
Well, President Fenves, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I don't know if you noticed, though, when he stepped away, you know, how suddenly I became up to his height here. So one of the things that I was worried about, I'm standing on a step stool here, and one of the things I was worried about when I was asked to come speak was that whether or not the podium would be about my size. Because oftentimes when I do come to public speaking events, the podium is rather large and imposing, and the only thing that you can see when I stand behind it are my highlights. So I made sure and got some highlights just for y'all. So I hope they look okay.
It's so funny, isn't it? Even to somebody who has achieved so much, you still have to put out occasionally. It's okay to be, you know, feminine too. And here's a question that I shouldn't even ask you really, because I would ask a man, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How have you balanced motherhood, family life, with a career that's so demanding and takes you away so much?
Yeah. So I am blessed to have the perfect partner. I truly am. And somebody who celebrates all of what my jobs and what my accomplishments and my tasks have included. But the other part of this, and this is so important, is I included my girls in just about everything that I could. So in the military, we have these traditions where we would have these huge military balls where we would be celebrating like the Navy's birthday or the Coast Guard's birthday. And my girls, from the time they were 7, 5, and 3, they would come to me in these formal balls. I always had to be in my military regalia, but my girls would be in these really cute matching outfits, you know, and they learned how to conduct themselves in the dinners. To this day, every one of them has this firm handshake. They look you straight in the eye and they tell you what their names are. Hi, I'm so-and-so. And I think that that's part of their growing up. But they thought everybody else had military balls to go to, and they were wondering, why didn't anybody else know what to do in these adult events? But the other part of that is I knew that in order to be their mom, or the best mom that I could be, I had to be willing to meet them where they were in their life. So if it was a soccer game on the weekend, and it meant standing by the sidelines, or I guess it would be the sidelines of the pitch, all day Saturday, that's what I did.
Yeah.
Or if I could take time out from my day to spend my lunchtime reading a story to a class, that's what I did. So I had a lot of support with my husband to do that, but I did as much as I could to include my girls in what I was doing, as much as I tried to be in their lives with what they were doing.
But I also gather that you don't just do that with your family. You do that with your young recruits. You do that with people who are serving. You bother, even when you're really tired, and you've got other things that some people might say are more important for you to do. You will actually go and wave them off, or welcome them back from service, or something that matters to them.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, recognizing other people's sacrifice, I think, is so important, and really letting them know it is not a small sacrifice, and that it is appreciated. And I think people need to be reminded of that, no matter where they're serving. To this day, this is something that's extremely important to me, whether it's people in uniform or not. I don't mind telling you that part of the reason why we are able to be as successful as we are in Viking is that we've got a medical department and we've got a lab department who are so dedicated to making sure that we get the tests correct, because they know how much it's riding on this. And so being able to stop by the lab whenever I'm on a ship and thank them for what they're doing, or being able to meet with the doctors and say, hey, I know that you really had a lot of activity going on. Thank you for keeping everybody so calm and comfortable.
Your husband tells a story of once when you were feeling really ill, and you both knew that there was a young serviceman or woman coming back, and was expecting. I think she or he had even told his relatives, she always turns up.
Yes.
She's always there to welcome us back. And they were looking forward to it. And your husband said to you, no, this time you can't. You're ill and you shouldn't go. And you still did, and it worked. It mattered, didn't it?
It did. I mean, I'd made it such a point of being there when they left and when they came back from their deployments. And this was like we were starting to bring back most everybody. So there weren't that many now in the groups, which was a good thing. Most of them were coming home. This was somebody who was, coming back on themselves. So I knew that there weren't going to be the crowds that everybody else. So it was really important that they knew that it mattered. So I was there.
Yeah, and even though you were feeling really rotten, it was to you and to them. That's the point, isn't it? Your husband has written some lovely, I don't know whether it's a book or a series of essays about just how splendid you are. And I'm going to really embarrass you now by reading an excerpt.
Okay.
Everyone should hear this. But he clearly, not only does he adore you, but he admires you. And wow, that's quite something for a husband about a wife. He says, since I was a boy, I've been fascinated by leaders who inspire people to believe in themselves and achieve things that were said to be impossible. There were many times that I thought I'd found this leader only to be disappointed when his true character was revealed. My passion, this is your husband still writing, for finding the ideal leader and my own search for authenticity are closely intertwined. True leaders aren't perfect, but they are authentic. They possess uncommon humility, integrity, and an uncompromising passion for doing what's right. My quest for finding both has been a lifelong exercise in patience, faith, and persistence. Leaders of great character are rare, but I never lost hope that I would one day see the vision of my youth in operation. He says, my faith was rewarded 6 years ago when I found this in Jacksonville, Florida. If you've ever longed to find a leader who touches your heart, renews your faith, and inspires you to believe again, then this is a story for you. I hope you will find it as inspiring reading as I did witnessing it. Ironically, after years of searching for this leader, I didn't have to travel far to find her. Turns out, I was married to her. Isn't that something?
He's a wonderful writer. He truly is, you know, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, I hope I didn't embarrass him too much, but clearly he feels that strongly, so why not share that? What do you think makes a good leader?
I think the ability to really hear people is so important. And I think what I've learned too about what's so important is, you know, being present and really being able to listen to people and being able to acknowledge that you've heard them and being able to thoughtfully and responsibly mirror back what you understand about what they've just shared with you. I mean, everybody, when you take that moment to listen to people, it's incredible what a gift they give you. When you truly hear them, it's a gift. But the other part of that I realized so much is that it's not just listening, it's to others, it's being able to hear yourself and understand what's going on, you know, in your own words and in your own reactions. And asking yourself, are those reactions or are those words getting in the way of my being a good leader or doing the right thing?
We've got some more lovely pictures of you, and almost every one you're with people. You seem to just love being people. What on earth is that one about?
I had filmed a little public service announcement for the military kids, and so I actually went up to Sesame Street, and that's a picture of me with Elmo.
No, you're a big deal when you've been on Sesame Street.
I know, it was the highest honor.
Oh my goodness! And there you are again, inspiring and talking to young recruits, young people in the service.
Yes, these are actually all from Army, Navy, and Air Force. These are female physicians in the military. And because I was one of the first to get to where I got there, they were wanting to have a conversation about what did they need to look for? What were some of the things that I could impart to them as secrets or hints to be able to navigate their way.
And again, you obviously do love speaking and communicating with people there. Do a lot of look of it.
Yes. Well, there was quite a lot, and part of what I was doing too during this time was there was a tremendous amount of change that was happening in the military health system. And with anything, you know, part of change and being able to do it effectively is communication, being able to communicate effectively.
I've got a crazy picture next, I think. Oh, there's more and more laughter, but I mean, medics are known to have a sort of slightly weird sense of humor.
Yes, oh yes, we are a strange bunch, yes. And my husband tells me all the time, you know, we laugh at some of these jokes and they don't make any sense to anybody else. We're a strange bird.
Medics have always been like this sort of slightly dark sense of humor, but there again, you seem to just love talking to people, anyone. Is that outside your hospital in Jacksonville?
No, as a matter of fact, this was in San Antonio, Texas, where I was meeting with some of on the left-hand side is, I was meeting some of the folks that were supporting some of our wounded warriors. And the dog there is a service animal. And of course, I had to ask permission because, you know, service animals are on duty and you don't want to distract them. So I had to make sure and get the right kind of permission in order to interact with the dogs.
Tell me about Mrs. Brown in the broom cupboard, because that was in Jacksonville, wasn't it?
It was.
Because you had a job to do there to make sure that everybody in the hospital, which had come under a lot of criticism, your job was to make sure they felt valued. Yes,
well, they had been quite a bit of bad press, and you know, that was where I actually learned the importance of being more thoughtful and not less reactive. And one of the things that I realized was that we needed to be able to present the best look to our patients. And so I went to housekeeping and I just I talked to Mrs. Brown and I said, you know, I want to thank you up front for the tremendous work you've done to keep our hospital as clean as possible, because I know our patients come in and the first thing they see is a clean hospital, and that automatically reassures them that we are looking out for their safety and their well-being. And I said, I just want to tell you right now, I noticed how you shine the elevator doors. I notice how our brass railings are always shining, and I never see any dust bunnies in the corner, which is easy to accumulate. And I just wanted to thank her. It was one of the first things I wanted to do when I got to the hospital. And she surprised me by saying, I've never had the head of the hospital come to my office. I didn't know that you knew where I was. And I said, of course, you know, I found where your office is, and I went to her. But he was so important.
It mattered to her as well, but it meant
Yes.
also then you instill a sense of pride, and she will want to go on, you know, working for you and performing the very best for you. But you bothered to do it, and you've obviously known that, maybe instinctively, I don't know, that you do reach out to people, and then they know that you care.
Yeah. Well, you know, I asked her, I said, what can I do to help you? And her answer was incredible. She said, I need a place to store some of my heavy cleaning equipment. She goes, how can I be accountable to you, and how can I keep my staff accountable to me if I don't have a place to store our heavy cleaning equipment? I thought, well, that's a really easy request. I should be able to do that. So I found her a storage room for heavy cleaning equipment.
And there you go. I mean, the fact that we're talking about cleaning and hospitals couldn't be more moot at the moment, could it, with the pandemic and everything that medics have had to face. As a medical professional, is it something you foresaw?
Yes, not to the degree that it played out, and it wasn't because I'm especially Christian or have that ability, but one of the jobs that I had in the military was to help conduct war games, and the war game that we conducted most frequently was, what do we do if there's a pandemic? So I had actually done war games about a pandemic, but when the actual pandemic happened, I realized that we'd gotten a couple of things wrong. We had thought that a pandemic would be very fast moving, that the incubation time would only be 6 hours. So if somebody flew from one side of the globe to the other, then the pandemic would start. What we didn't know was that we were going to have a virus, an organism that took 14 days to incubate and that could spread the entire time, and that a certain percentage of people would not even be aware that they were sick when they're spreading. So in a way, yes, I knew that a pandemic was entirely possible. And when the early reports of the coronavirus started coming on, part of me was wishing I was back in uniform, saying, okay, we've got to do this. We know what we need to do. We've done this war game. Another part of me was thinking, okay, I'm glad there's somebody else who's doing that, and I'll just watch from the sidelines.
You didn't watch from the sidelines.
I didn't, no.
I mean, you took on a new role, overseeing COVID protocols in Washington State.
Yes.
What did you have to do, and what are your thoughts looking back on it now?
Well, it was such a, you're right, I did not stay on the sidelines. I was an avid, observer of all this, but I got the call from the governor from Washington State, and he said, I need help. And I said, well, what do you need help with? And he says, I need some help, organizing our medical assets, our healthcare assets. I need somebody who's accustomed to command and control, and I need somebody who's not afraid to give orders. And I said, okay, well, when do you need me? This was a Saturday morning. He goes, well, last week. So I got on a plane the following day, and on Monday morning at 7 o'clock, I was in his office. And looking back on that, there are just some incredible things that I learned, and I had such incredible people to work with, because everybody does in the end, no matter where you're from, they all wanted to do the same thing. They all wanted to keep each other safe. They all wanted this to somehow be better controlled and to go away. And so being able to work with such dedicated people who up front knew how daunting this was going to be was, I think the group of us, the teams that we put together, started some very incredible things. And as I look back, I'm so proud that some of this is still sustained, and overall they continue to do well.
And of course, as you were managing that ongoing crisis, at that time, you wouldn't have known that we would have a vaccine. We might have all hoped it would be a vaccine, but you couldn't count on it, could you?
No. As a matter of fact, that was my whole thinking, is that we had to find a way to work through this virus, even if a vaccine wasn't going to be available. And knowing how long vaccines normally take to develop, I was prepared that the long haul was going to look like we were going to have at least 2.5 years of just spread without any vaccine. So what was the best way to create the safest environment to function in that without a vaccine?
Yeah, that's been the conundrum ever since, because it's not over yet, is it?
It isn't. No, it's not. It's not. And if you look at previous history of the 1918 pandemic, it actually went for 2.5 years, and they didn't have a vaccine at all. So, you know, we're kind of mirroring that even with the vaccine, and it's because we've got these variants that have emerged.
What are your thoughts on some people's reluctance to have the vaccination and the more extreme anti-vaccine movement?
Yeah, you know, I completely understand why people might be ill at ease with this, but I think it's important to remind people that, you know, we've had vaccines for a very long time. Measles and mumps, being able to eradicate smallpox, and polio, I mean, all came with some kind of anti-serum or vaccine. And so this isn't necessarily new, having a vaccine. And so if some of the reluctance is because this seems kind of new, or I think it's important to remind people that we've had vaccines, and they've been largely responsible for how well our health has been up to this point.
I mean, some people are suspicious, aren't they, because the vaccine was developed so quickly.
Yes.
Can you explain to us non-medics how that was possible?
Yeah. You know, exactly. And I think I understand that, but what's more fascinating is the technology we use to come up with these mRNA vaccines that happen so quickly is groundbreaking. So the usual way that we make vaccines is we take a small amount of the vaccine itself, and we kind of make it less potent. And then we inject it into, an animal and allow them to create antibodies to that. We extract that, usually the antibodies, and then we distill it, and we make sure that we can give that to a human. What we did in this case is we took a part of the protein that's on the surface of the coronavirus, and we kind of engineered the body to recognize that that's a foreign protein, and then be able to mount an antibody response. And it turns out, because we just targeted certain proteins on the surface of the virus itself, that it was a much quicker way. We just took the protein and the RNA and fashioned the antibodies in response to that. So it was much faster, and it's actually a much safer vaccine that we produced.
I just wonder, people will be watching thinking, you know, it's because they threw so much money at it, our researchers and scientists were able to move fast.
Yes.
Doesn't that suggest that all sorts of treatments and cures could be found more quickly if we threw money at the problem?
Well, I think it's more than money, but money's a good part of it. I think it's really dedicated focus and commitment to that. And again, you know, if you've got that and you've got the right combination, yes, we could apply this to a lot of other cures that are needed.
Always makes you wonder, doesn't it? Tell us about your role at Viking then. What were the challenges that you were faced with when do they do the same thing, call you up and say, we need somebody who a bit like this, a bit like that, and actually that's you?
They did. They actually cold called me. I received this email, and they had somehow found my LinkedIn profile. And I received this email, and they said, this individual that contacted me said, I'm from Viking. We know that you have this background and this background and this background, and we would be interested in talking to you. And I tell this story, but it's true. I sent the email to my husband, who wasn't with me at the time because I was in Washington State. I said, can you check to see if this is legit? It was like one of those emails where, dear beloved, you have inherited or you've received, a large sum of money. And I said, is this legit? So my husband, who's a really good super sleuth, he actually went and he found out, yes, this is a person that actually works with Viking. Viking is a real organization, and the names that are mentioned in this email are also legit. And he said, try it and see. And I said, okay. I was curious. So I called back, and we set up a time. And actually, what really impressed me is once I called back and they said, we want to set up a time, it was a video conference like this, and that's where I met Tor and Karina. I mean, right off the bat, they introduced me to them. And, I heard what they were facing, and I thought, wow, and here's selfishly, this is what I thought at the time. I thought, if I can help Viking in an industry that has really been beleaguered by this and really just taken a disproportionate hit, if I can find a way to make this happen in this industry, then perhaps maybe there's some lessons for others, because we all need to somehow find a way that we can continue living, continue life. We can't wait for this to be over. So selfishly, that's why I said yes.
Well, that's right. And you're even used to being at sea. I mean,
Yeah. How perfect could that be?
Absolutely. Let's hear in this little clip of a video here from Torstein Hagen, Viking's chairman, about what's been done on the ships to ensure maximum possible safety. So look.
Over the past few months, we have all missed the opportunity to travel the world. I want to share with you that we have implemented the very highest standards of precautions on board our ships to ensure that travel with Viking is as safe as it can be in 2021. I'm extremely pleased to note that our Viking ships have structural advantages that also make them well suited for these times. Our ships are small, and all our ocean ships have balconies, no shared air between guest cabins, and plenty of public space, as well as outdoor dining, which we all like. To make the ships even more suitable for COVID times, there are a few enhancements we have felt it appropriate to make. But it's remarkable how little impact this will have on your next experience on board. There are now automated cameras that take your temperature on both ocean and river ships. On the ocean ships, we have 2 UVC robots. They are at work to disinfect public spaces while you'll be asleep. And the air ventilation systems have been equipped with UVC light and electrostatic filters. These are not noticeable to you, but are proven to kill 99.9% of the pathogens. That includes the COVID virus. We now have a little bit more distance between the dining tables. They were already well spaced out. You will not notice a big difference from before. And in case of our river ships, I think it makes the experience even nicer. But the key to making ships safe for the future lies in testing.
Now, see, I think that's a very interesting question, because now that we do have a vaccine, and Viking has gone as far as to say everybody on board now has to be double vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So a lot of people will say, why then is testing still so important?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. And I think there were actually a couple of elements or factors that were still in consideration. When we started guest operations, we had our crew who we were also vaccinated. But because we had a certain amount of turnover, we needed to get to a level where we made sure that all of our crew were fully vaccinated. And because there was a lag between the first and the second jab, when we started operations, I wanted to make sure that we kept our crew as safe as possible. So testing was important to make sure that we were testing our crew and our passengers to make sure that there wasn't some type of infection. But what was also starting to come out, and I was seeing this, and I was waiting to see how big it was going to get, was that we were starting to see early signs that there were breakthrough infections. That even if you were fully vaccinated, there was still a chance that you would be able to get infected. The good news was that if you were infected, you were unlikely to have very severe consequences or need hospitalization, and it was unlikely that you would die, which is all very positive. But what we found out very quickly is that even if you're fully vaccinated, you can also transmit the virus. So as we were going into different countries, and as we were making sure that our crew were as safe as possible, being able to go into different ports and being able to tell them that we've tested everybody and we know we don't have any infection was reassuring to the countries, the port cities, but it also was very reassuring to us because we knew we weren't introducing the virus into the communities that we were visiting. So it really helped understand, what our actual risks were, and that's why we continue to do the testing. And we're not sure, if we're going to stick to the same testing regimen that we have now, which is daily. And I think that's extremely important. As we get a little bit more information and we understand what happens with the variants and how well the vaccines continue to work, then we might modify that. But the testing part is what allows us to help make sure that we identify it early and we prevent the spread.
It's interesting as well, isn't it? Because what you've got on a ship with fully vaccinated crew and guests is you've got a unique way of actually looking to see if the virus is changing or is to get on board somehow or whatever. Whatever data you end up getting, I presume you share it. It's very valuable, isn't it?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we've started really looking at our data very critically. We have well over hundreds of thousands of test results now, and we are able to correlate when we find an infection with somebody's travel to understand kind of where they might have picked it up. So yes, we are we've shared some of this with the CDC. I've also had a chance to talk to the Imperial College of London and share some of our experience there. And yes, there's definitely interest, and I think that the power of our observations is backed up by the number of tests and people that we've been testing.
Well, let's have another look at a little clip from that same video, where once again Torstein Hagen tells us why he felt it so important to follow your advice on how to make his ships sailing as safe as humanly possible. Let's have a look at what he says.
Dr. Bono has already been working with us several months, developing our protocols, and I'm pleased to say she is now a permanent member of our Viking family, holding the position of Chief Health Officer. We also have a partnership with one of the leading medical diagnostic firms in the world, Medicover, who will be running our labs on board on the ocean ships and provide the land-based labs for our river ships. Now, our experts agree with daily PCR testing, it is possible to virtually eliminate any spread of virus on board our ocean or river ships. So that's like any ocean or river ship. With daily PCR testing, daily testing, one can also operate longer cruises without any significant risk of community spread on board the ships, not limiting oneself to 7 days or 4 days or whatever. You can operate proper cruises.
Yes, proper sailing again. So what has it been like for you going on all the different river ships and ocean ships and putting in laboratories in? It must have been an extraordinary experience for you.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, I knew that we could put laboratories on ships because I come from the US Navy and we actually have laboratories on the ships. So I knew it was possible. And I just have to say, part of this whole experience is truly predicated on Tor's his vision and his support, because I asked him from the beginning, would you support taking a more public health informed approach to restarting sailing, because I think that's going to be what differentiates us. And because he's a scientist and because he sees things in a very data-driven way, I think it was easy for him to see the compelling logic of testing. So that in itself is an extremely unique experience to find somebody who, in that sense, is a kindred spirit. So that was a match for me.
Yeah.
But then being able to go on these beautiful ships, and I have to tell you that as much as I love the U.S. Navy, our staterooms do not look like a Viking ship. So, but being able to have these beautiful ships, both on the ocean and in the rivers, is an incredible experience. And the environment itself is just so comforting. It's so pleasant, and automatically, right from the start, I could see, okay, we can still create safe spaces and keep them intimate because of the outline, the layout of the ships and the way the furniture is arranged. You wouldn't see it right now, but if you were to see before and afters, we just kind of nudge the furniture a little bit so that we could create enough distance. But then being able to interact with the crew and become a part of the conversation with them about what we need to do to keep things safe. And seeing them take this on, like I see now some of the ocean vessels, they have a certain amount of pride in how well they're keeping their crew safe and what kind of bubbles they're creating. So it's just been another gratifying and rewarding experience to be working with people who are very dedicated to doing this the right way and have been willing to take on some of the changes and the adjustments that we've made and do it so wholeheartedly.
There's a very old British recruitment slogan that says, "Join the Navy and see the world." Have you seen the world, or are there still parts of the world you have to go to?
Oh, I saw a lot of the world when I was in my military job. That was in mostly Indo-Asia Pacific. And I saw a little bit of Europe when I was in the military, but with this job, I'm truly seeing another part of the world. I mean, it's just fascinating. It's really an incredible experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It is for most people. Questions from those very people. From Pam and Brian Leith in New Hampshire. Will we ever return to normal, or will we always have the threat of COVID or something like it?
That's such a great question. And, I've heard it before about getting back to normal. And there's a part of me that says, well, why do we want to get back to normal? Right? I mean, I think that we found some really great things that I don't necessarily want to give up at this point. I don't want to go back to the way it was. I want to create a new normal. So I'm not necessarily too motivated to go back to the way it was, but I do feel that moving forward, we've learned so many things. We can be so much smarter about this. And I think going forward, it may not be coronavirus, but I hope that we do not forget the lessons learned here, because there's, our health systems and people are actually quite fragile when you look at it. And I take care of that.
When you get in an elevator now and it says maximum 3 people or maximum 2 people, and you think, I'm quite happy with that, actually. I mean, I know it's a bit hard on the elevator system, but maybe we were breathing in each other's air too much and kissing the minute we hugged, we got to know everybody. And maybe we did need to rethink some things.
Oh, yes. We absolutely did. In the year and a half, nearly 2 years that we've had the pandemic going on, the flu rate has actually dropped. And colds have been, just the common cold have also dropped. And I don't think that's a bad thing. If we can help control disease and disease spread better because of this, then I think that's a win for all of us.
Sam in Arkansas says, where do you think it came from? What caused it?
That's a great question. One of the things about the coronavirus, why everyone started, I think you remember we were calling it the novel coronavirus. It was because we hadn't seen it. But what was novel about it is none of us, anybody, no human on the earth had ever been exposed to this. So that's why we were all so susceptible. I know there are some theories that it might have been manufactured. I don't know. I just know that the fact that we have a virus that could affect us like this tells me that there are other viruses that can also do this too.
Yeah. And that's where those lifelong lessons, maybe we ought to learn them and keep some of them. Ellen Vaughan in London says, have you actually left the Navy? How long could you serve if you wanted to, or do you have to retire at a certain age?
So I've actually left the Navy. I spent 35 years in the Navy, and part of it was, in spite of the fact that I was just loving what I did, part of the responsibility I also had was, as I mentioned before, I mentored men and women in my career. And part of being a good leader is preparing others to take your place. And so it was time for me to let somebody else come into this, take my place. and continue that succession plan. So if I'd done everything right the way I should have done, then I should have been able to mentor myself out of a job because I'd
Yes.
trained
Yes.
somebody else to come behind me.
But also, when you retire, you expect a much quieter life, and you haven't had that. You've sort of
No.
retired to a pandemic, didn't you? Tam Wally in Manchester says, after serving on military ships, did the luxury of a Viking ship appall or delight you?
Completely delighted me. Although I will have to say this, for as much as I love the coffee and the cappuccinos that I get on board the Viking ships, both the rivers and oceans, I do have to say that the U.S. Navy coffee does, have it's a class of its own, and that's something that I don't think, yes, they don't do the special latte drinks or anything like that. This is just good brewed coffee.
Yeah.
And I will say too that the chefs that we had in the Navy, I had quite a few chefs that worked for me that actually competed on the Iron Chef competitions because the cooking on the ships is so good. But yeah, I don't mind being on a Viking ship ever.
Just because you're in the military doesn't mean you don't fancy a bit of luxury from time to time.
Absolutely.
Magda Lloyd, this is a good one. Although you have explained that you're retired, but she says, when you are on board a Viking ship, who is the boss, you or the captain?
Well, even as an admiral, even when I would go on to a Navy ship, it was also the captain who's in charge. Now, of course, there are certain perks that you get for being an admiral when you go on a Navy ship. But yes, on any of the Viking ships, it's the captain who's in charge. But I will say this, they're very generous with letting me come on the bridge and see what's going on.
Well, that's your business, isn't it?
Yes.
Lydia from New York says, you are obviously, if you don't mind me saying, quite petite. Has that made it hard? Has that made it hard when giving orders?
No. So here's what's interesting about being in the military. People assume that part of being a leader in the military is being able to give orders, and I very rarely had to give orders. If I had to give an order, it was actually a failure in my own leadership. So, and that's how I approach things. So if I had to give an order, then there was some kind of breakdown, and I should have prevented that breakdown in some way. What I did find out, though, because I am not very tall, and I don't have a very loud or booming voice, what I would do sometimes if I was particularly concerned about the way something was happening and I wanted to get people's attention, rather than raising my voice, I actually lowered it. And what happened, people had to lean in to hear me. And when they were paying attention, that's when I would really press some of the points I needed to make.
Well, that's very intimidating, actually, isn't it? Yeah, I can see that working well. So, where you're at Viking headquarters at the moment, working away.
Yes.
Are you sort of going from ship to ship?
Yes, I had been going from ocean vessel to ocean vessel, and I just came back last week where I've been going around some of the river vessels and seeing how the protocols are working there. They're working very well, and I'm excited to see how well they're working. We are continually adjusting. So as something happens with either a change in the COVID activity or as we look at some of the testing protocols, it requires that I go to a different ship. We are looking to go into the U.S. waters soon. So I anticipate that I'll be going back to the U.S. and seeing some of our ships there.
And humans are very adaptable, aren't they? Because I've heard from several people on the ships who've said we were expecting it to feel awkward, wearing masks in the corridors and only taking them off when you're eating or whatever, and and limited number of people in elevators and social distanced in the theatre and everything. But they said actually it didn't jibe, but it didn't sort of feel weird at all. It was, I must say, I concur with that too. You get used to it very quickly, and then it wasn't always that way.
Right. And and the way I've come to see it too, of course, I have a slightly different point of view. As a surgeon, I spent all day in a mask, so I don't find that unusual at all. But I have also realized too that sometimes wearing a mask is a small price to pay to be able to get out again.
Actually, that's interesting. I'm going to ask you very quickly about that. When you do train to be a nurse or a doctor or anything in a healthcare situation where you have to wear masks a lot, presumably you don't like it at first, but then you do work at it and get used to it.
Right. Yes, it's you quickly adapt to it. It becomes part of your uniform, so to speak. But the other part of this too, and from a physician, from a clinician standpoint, what a lot of people don't realize is the reason we wore masks was not to protect ourselves, it was to protect our patients. And that's, I still see it that way too. You know, being able to wear a mask means I'm able to protect others who are around me.
Oh, goodness. Well, look, thank you for your years of service, which hasn't stopped yet, clearly.
No.
Yeah, go away and have a good rest and relax in a little bit of luxury from time to time. But it's been wonderful to hear your story. It really has been amazing. You have achieved so much and are going on working at it, and we'll not let you stop.
Thank you.
Dr. Bunny. And I gather your name is Rocky. I mean, your proper name is Raquel Bono, but they call you Rocky.
Yes, that's my call sign. Call signs are not chosen, they're given to you. And I have used that to my advantage, because when most people hear that Rocky Bono is coming, I'm sure they have a preconception of what Rocky Bono looks like until I walk into the room.
Oh, no, it's a good one, isn't it? Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rocky, rather. Thank you very, very much for a fabulous interview. It's been great to meet you.
Thank you so much.
And I'm sure we'll meet from time to time as well, because you're popping up.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, it's been lovely to meet you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And goodbye. Thank you. Let me just tell you here that next week's guests will be Jerry Sadler and Rick Miners. Now, they've written a fabulous book called Don't Retire, Rewire. Jerry and Rick are a husband and wife team, and they've created this guide for those approaching retirement on how to take that next step in their lives or their careers, and how that doesn't have to mean slowing down or getting boring, but actually finding work, whether paid or voluntary, finding a way to matter, which is fulfilling and suits your passions and interests. So it'll be interesting to see what their tips are. So that's Don't Retire, Rewire, coming up. Bye-bye.